has a very special relationship to Katrien in a different way because we have a very special relationship too, Katrien. But so Vince is going to do a formal introduction. So I'm just going to give the floor over to Vince, and then we'll get started. Vince.
All right. Well, hello everyone, and yeah, thanks indeed for coming along to this live meeting this afternoon. Jason alluded to, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Katrien Segaert, who joins us from the University of Birmingham. I won't spend too much time detailing her history. She comes originally from the Max Planck Institute in Nijmegen and now has been at Birmingham for several years at this point. Many of you will know her considerable breadth and depth of work on the neural correlates of language processing across the lifespan, where she's done a lot of really cool work looking at the intersection of language processing and aging. And I got to know her in the last going on 6-7 years at this point, as she was once one of my PIs on a project we collaborated on looking at the effects of bilingualism on brain structure and function. In addition to being a wonderful researcher, Katrien is a wonderful, pragmatic supervisor and is, for the benefit of all of us today, a really great public speaker. So you're in for a treat, but don't take it from me. I'll let the proof speak for itself. Katrien, we're very much looking forward to seeing what you'll be presenting today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think.
Yeah, you should hear what Vince says about me. It's the adjective selection that's pragmatic and but he means it that he
We'll talk after about that then. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm glad that we're physically closer now so that we can. Okay, so Jason invited me here kindly today to talk about aging. I'll talk to you about aging and thing. And yeah, there you go. Okay, so aging. I think anyone in this audience who's ever had a conversation with someone over the age of 60 years old knows that aging comes with challenges, changes, problems, so let's have a look. So as we age, people become less physically active. People walk less. There's decline in very core physical functions. So these are results of a timed up and go test. So it's a test that is very often used by aging researchers. It's super basic. It's literally get up from a chair, walk 3 meters, turn around and sit back down. Fitness levels decline as we age. And so this decline, this physical decline, is going to decline. It doesn't start at the age of 60 or the age of 60, right? So it happens gradually over the lifespan. I'm turning 40 really soon. So I'll let you ponder in silence where you're sitting on this graph. So I'm here. So fitness levels, cardiovascular fitness levels decline. Another one that people notice, it's very common, is cognitive decline. So what's most often measured and talked about is episodic memory decline, process speed decline, and then today we'll talk about. And so the reason that aging researchers or academics that they measure these things, it's important to remember why we're looking at these things, is all of these things relates to very basic things in everyday life, right? So you're sitting on the sofa, you're deciding you go to the grocery store, you need to get up from the sofa, walk out of your house. You're deciding whether to walk to the store or take the car to the grocery store. And then in the grocery store, you need to remember what it was that you had decided to buy. And then you need to interact with this bloody automatic checkout machine that's never working. So all of these things are like everyday life activities that academics then try to translate and measure in a lab. But they're all relevant to everyday life, right? So it's clear from these graphs that there's not only very apparent decline with age, but there's a lot of individual variability as well. And maybe the individual variability is more prominent than the actual decline with increasing chronological age, right? So you see the effect on average of chronological age, and then you see the variability around it. Maybe that's more important, both more challenging and also more interesting to look at than the actual effect of chronological age, right? So you have this 70-year-old here and you have this 70-year-old here. Why is this person sitting there and this person sitting there? And how can I be the person who sits there and not there when I'm 70, right? So those are, I think, the important questions. So what I'll talk about today is the effect of aging, healthy aging. So I'm only talking about healthy aging. I'm not talking about, for example, any neurodegenerative diseases like dementia or mouth movement impairment. I'm talking about people who are aging healthily, the effect of healthy aging on language processing. We'll talk about individual differences because they're important. Why do some older adults experience more language decline than others? And then we'll end with talking about possible interventions to ameliorate language decline. Right, so let's start at the beginning. What language skills are impacted by healthy aging? And the very short answer is there's decline in many core aspects of both speaking, so language production, and understanding. One of those very prominent ones, the one that people know about, or think about first, are tip of the tongue, right? So you ask someone over the age of 65, the cognitive problems that they're experiencing, tip of the tongue states will be in their top 3 or their top 5, right? So you know a word, you know that you know a word, but you temporarily don't access enough of the phonological information to be able to articulate. So this is a phonological access issue. So you invite participants into a psychology building to measure tip of the tongue states. So you can use pictures of famous people. We use definitions. The advantage is that you're not restricted to proper names. You can use regular nouns. So you can give definitions like, what is Princess Diana's maiden name? Really, Jess?
Spencer.
Yeah. Or you can ask things like termination of existence of a species. Extinct. Right, so people are supposed to say, I know this word, it's extinction. I don't know this word, or, oh, I know this, but I'm having a tip of the tongue stage, right? And so older adults experience more tip of the tongue states than younger adults. And when they experience tip of the tongue states, younger adults have access to more phonological information still than older adults do. So you can ask people to report partial phonological information they still have access to, like what's the first letter, what's the last letter, how many syllables does this word have, and so younger adults are able to report more of that. Another really known or one that people very much agree on, these are not data from my lab, so Susan Kemper has done a series of really lovely studies in the early 2000s looking at aging and syntactic complexity. And reported that syntactic complexity is reduced in spoken and written languages. So people use shorter and simpler sentences, right? So people choose to produce sentences with less complex syntactic structures, fewer embedded clauses, fewer clauses per utterance. So syntactic complexity goes down. This is not to say that every aspect of language production declines with age. There are aspects of language production that seem to be unaffected by age, and one of those is syntactic planning scope. So language production occurs incrementally, right? So we generate a message, but we only plan parts of it before we start speaking the message, right? And so then after speech onset, you plan the rest of it. And so we know a lot about planning scope. We know a lot about how much and what you plan before you start speaking. So with these noun phrases, we know you plan the noun phrase that is before the verb before you start speaking. So you will have slower speech onsets for the owl and the cart move above the harp, then for the owl moves above the cart and the harp, right? Noun phrase. And so these speech planning patterns, so planning scope, is very similar for young and older adults. And so we've replicated this with slightly different types of sentences. how much you plan. Of course, older adults are overall slower than younger adults, but these patterns of planning scope seem very similar between young. So moving on to comprehension. Yes, moving on to comprehension. So a lot of people think that when you talk about language comprehension and aging, so language comprehension is like, oh, well, there's no effect of aging. It's what people read in review papers about language, or like book chapters about aging. Language comprehension supposedly would be unaffected by aging. So this is not correct. There's definitely aspects of language comprehension that are impaired with aging as well. So one of those is morphosyntactic comprehension. So we've done a series of experiments with very simple two-word phrases. And so in this one, we're looking at pronoun-verb agreement. So we know that, just to check that you're still awake, we know that I drink coffee is correct, and Jason drinks cola zero is correct, but I drinks coffee is incorrect, and Jason drink, well, anything else than coffee is anything else in cola is also incorrect, right? So we know these things and we can detect the mistakes. So we can do an accuracy task with these kind of things. We can do it with real verbs. We can do it with verbs that don't have any meanings. We can do it with pseudo verbs. That's what the meaning can't help us. And so older adults do this less well than younger adults. They do it. They're slower and they make more mistakes. They're proportionally disproportionately affected when you take the meaning out of it. So they're disproportionately worse with pseudo verbs than with real words as well. So definitely the case that there's aspects of comprehension that are negatively impacted by age. Parts of, just like there's parts of production that are unimpaired by aging, there's aspects of comprehension that are unimpaired by aging. So in this task, people monitor for a target word, in this case, spatula, and that's more difficult to do in a sentence with random words than in a low constraint or a high constraint sentence, because in a low constraint sentence, the syntactic processing of the sentence is helping you compared to random words. And in a high constraint sentence, not only that, but also the sentence level semantics of the sentence is helping you, right? So that's giving you an indication of semantic and syntactic processing. And again, of course, older adults are slower, but their sentence level semantic and syntactic process seems very similar because the condition comparisons between younger and older adults are very similar. And so I'm really sorry, Jason. So I'm only focusing on the monolinguals in this talk because I only have 50 minutes. So I'm not talking about bilingualism. I'll only talk about it afterwards. So that's an aspect of language comprehension that seems unimpaired. So it's complicated, right? So there's decline in many core aspects of both producing language, there's decline in core aspects of comprehending language, but there's preservation in both as well. So it's a very complex picture. On top of that, there's a large degree of individual variability between people. So let's go back to the Jason drinks cola task. That's the official name of the task for the purpose of today. I've shown you the group averages. Sure, lovely. Older adults are worse than younger adults. But look at the individual variability. Sure, on average, older adults are worse than younger adults, but the individual variability within the older adults is much more vast than it is for younger adults. And that's very representative of these types of language tasks when you look at aging. So why is that person here and that person here? How can we be that person? How can we be that person and how can we not that person? Right? So that's what we really want to know. And one of the, shall I wait for you to?
No, I want you to get the picture. Just
okay.
We're good friends, guys.
So one of the ways that we can start to try and understand is we can see, okay, so what does this individual variability relate to? And so a first step is, does it relate to other aspects of cognitive function that we know decline with age? So how does it relate to working memory and processing speed, for example? And we see that there are positive relationships. So it seems to be that those older adults who are aging better when it comes to their language decline are also the same older adults who are aging better when it comes to their working memory, their processing speed. Right? So that's like a start of like trying to understand what's going on. And so one thing that I find helpful is to think about this as like markers almost of how an individual is aging, right? So there's these frameworks where people propose biomarkers of healthy aging, right? And so this is an audience of psychologists and linguists. So let's look at this category first, right? So biomarkers of cognitive function. And so what aging researchers look at, it will always be memory, processing speed, or executive function. And I say the language should be squeezed right in there as well, because it's someone who's aging better in these aspects will be aging better in their language function as well. So it fits in there, and it's really important as memory and processing. So you've got biomarkers of cognitive function, and they will relate to each other. But it goes much broader than that, right? Because a person is much more than that. So how well someone's aging in this domain relates to how well someone's aging in these other domains as well. So the prediction, when you're using a framework like that, and I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but you can see where I'm going with this talk. So prediction from something like this will be that a marker of how well someone's aging in the cognitive domain is going to be related to a marker in the physical domain, like their strength and balance scores, a marker in the physiological function domain, so their cardiovascular function and fitness levels, and these other domains, right? So we're moving away from asking, so what parts of language are declining, which abilities are declining, which processes are declining? Maybe that's not the most interesting question. Let's not look at what is declining, but let's look at who's declining, right? So why is this person who's 75 years old and this person who's also 75 years old, why are they so different? Why is this one aging well and scoring well in all of these domains, and this person is not, right? So who is aging better and why? So let's go back to the tip of the tongue task. I showed you the group averages. Older adults have a lot more tip of tongue states than younger adults do. But as with all of these tasks, there's individual variability, and this graph shows it really well. And not only do the tip of the tongue states increase with age, the variability increases with age as well, right? So why is this person there and this person? So in the data that I'm about to show you, we didn't just look at tip of the tongue states, we also looked at people's cardiovascular. So they don't just come and do a comfortable recognition task in the lab, they also do a VO2 max test. So you put people on an exercise bike or a treadmill, and you measure the oxygen that's consumed by exercising muscles. So those of you who have a fitness watch or an Apple Watch, it will tell you what your VO2 max score is. It will be an approximation. It's not as good as the gold standard measures that you use in the lab, but it's an approximation based on your heart rate. And then it will compare you to the averages that are known for your sex and age group. And I will tell you what your fitness age is as well. And so we did something similar, right? So you can Z-score this, and then the people who are sitting here are older adults who are scoring a standard deviation above their group mean, and these are the people who are scoring a standard deviation below it. And so you can see how much explanatory power something that seems very far removed from language, but really it isn't that far removed from language. The strength of the explanatory power it has. So someone who's sitting here has a 10% chance of experiencing a tip of the tongue state in our definition test. Someone who's sitting here has a 16% chance of experiencing a tip of the tongue state. Right. So then the next question is, so what are the brain health mechanisms that explain relationship like this, right? So what I'm showing you next is data where we don't just measure tip of the tongue states and fitness levels. We also have people in the MRI, and we measure brain structural, cerebral blood flow, and we measure brain function during a tip of the tongue test. And then you get a whole lot of data. Data which makes sense and we know it's showing us what we know, right? So typical tongue states increase with age, fitness decreases with age. For typical tongue states compared to knowing a word and being able to produce the word, you get the standard network that we see in typical tongue tasks. You see frontal temporal areas, so ACC involvement. You see a lot of variability in your blood flow results, and you see brain structure, you see atrophy with age, right? So we know all of these things. Great. What we want to know is how does all of this now combine to explain the typical tongue states? That's what we want to know, right? We want to be able to predict someone's ability, someone's behavior. Are they going to experience typical tongue states or not? And so to bring all of these data together, we use something called commonality analysis. So commonality analysis are a useful way of analyzing multi-domain data. So you have data from all of these different domains that you need to bring together. And so it helps you understand the contributions of all of these different predictors to explaining what your dependent variable is, your variable of interest, which in our case is the tip of the tongue occurrence. That's what we want to explain. That's what we want to predict. And so we know from like looking at these types of data in like univariate analyses, we know things like, of course, blood flow is related with fitness. Of course, brain structure is related with fitness. But what we want to really know is what of those associations is actually determining or explaining your tip of the tongue behavior, right? That's what we want to know. And then this is what we find. And so this looks like just a picture we drew for fun, but this is actually the results of the commonality model, just visually represented in these circles. And what we see is, okay, so age explains tip of the tongue states. Great. The shared variance between age and structure and age and your cerebral blood flow explains tip of the tongue states, like your behavior. Fitness explains tip of the tongue states. Great. And it's the association between fitness and function that matters. So fitness doesn't share any variance with brain structure or perfusion. What it shares variance with is your brain function. So it's your brain function network that is modified by your fitness levels, which then goes to explain your tip of the tongue occurrences. So it's the brain function that changes, and that matters in terms of actually predicting your abilities and your output variables. It's through brain function that fitness is determining whether you're going to. And so we can understand this against the backdrop of these wider cognitive aging theory and these concepts that are very popular in the aging literature. These are concepts I'm sure you've heard of, like reserve, maintenance, and compensation. And so basically what these concepts do is they explain cognitive decline, individual differences in cognitive and language decline and the rate of decline through underlying age-related changes in brain function and brain structure, and how all of that then relates to internal and external aspects of a person. So internal genetics, external environmental and lifestyle stuff, right? So how this interacts with the brain function and structure mechanisms, and then explains the individual differences in cognitive decline. And what the results are just showed you are compatible with is with the ideas of compensation and reserve. So the idea of compensation basically just means that you get differential recruitment. This could be change in activations, change in connectivity. So you get differential recruitment of your brain function network in an attempt to counteract decline elsewhere in the brain to meet the demands of your cognitive task. And in this case, these are your tip of the tongue occurrences. So it's compatible with the idea of compensation, and it's compatible with the idea of reserve as well. So the idea of reserve basically proposes that you accumulate neural resources throughout your lifespan beyond what you require, so that then when you lose your neural resources, you still have enough to meet the demands of it. And so usually people will use education and occupational attainment as a proxy for reserve. But you can conceptualize that wider, and fitness can also contribute to accumulating reserve over your lifespan and making sure that you accumulate resources beyond what you actually structurally require. So we can conceptualize that wider and include more things than just what the typical proxies are. And why stop at education and occupational attainment and fitness levels and the activity levels that are related to it? You can just keep going, right? What about vascular burden, general health, active participation in, leisure activities, your social embeddedness, bilingualism? Yes, Jason's very happy. Finally, we got there. Diet, alcohol intake, sleep, stress, right? All of it, right? So all of this is part of a person's external environment and lifestyle. So how do you understand the contribution of all of this to your language abilities, right? It's not easy, right? So one approach, and that's the approach that I've just shown you, is, you can do your best to measure some of these lifestyle factors and try and explain language behavior. It's an approach that we've used successfully in a series of our experiments, and it's useful to try and do that because given that people vary so widely in all of these things, and we know that all of these things determine your brain health mechanisms and your brain health across the lifespan, how is chronological age ever going to be enough to explain your language behavior, right? It's never going to work. You have to be looking at these things as well. But however well you measure a few of these variables, still the approach is inherently flawed in that you're measuring a few of these variables and not all of them, right? But then who has money and time to measure all of these, right? I don't, that's for sure. So it's something that works, but then we have to recognize the downsides of it as well. So another approach that we've taken is we've somehow abstracted away from this level and gone to this level, and we've looked at brain structure biomarkers of how well people are aging and try to relate that to language decline. The approach that we've taken that was somehow less successful than the other approach to already give you an answer. So we looked at the utility of a brain structure marker of how well someone's aging. We've looked at predicted brain age, and predicted brain age is a neuroimaging marker of whether your brain appears younger or older than you would expect for someone on average for that chronological age, right? So you have someone's chronological age. This is the chronological age of the people in this experiment. So you know their chronological age, and then you derive based on machine learning approaches, and this is like done in an accepted way. It's accepted in the field how you do this based on pictures of someone's brain structure using gray and white matter. You derive what their brain age is. And so their brain age could be higher. So that means someone has accelerated brain aging. They're aging worse than what you would expect based on age, or it could be lower, and then someone has decelerated. Is that the antonym of accelerated aging? And so then they're aging better than what you would expect based on their age. So this gives you a brain structure biomarker of how well someone's aging. And so does that then relate to people's language abilities? You would hope so, but we didn't find that it is. So we looked at language abilities across a range of tasks. So Janina worked very hard at this for a very long time. And so we looked at the spatula task, reading comprehension, different syntactic complexity levels, phrase production, tip of the tongue tasks. It just doesn't relate to people's language abilities if you look at a group of healthy adults. And this is despite people finding that this type of brain structure biomarker relates to like more coarse composite measures of cognition that don't include language. It just doesn't seem to relate to language abilities in healthy older people, but maybe it does if you look at people who are aging healthily, or maybe it doesn't, and we can't make this level as simple as just looking at brain structure. Maybe it's really, and that would be in line with the earlier findings I showed you, maybe you can't figure this out if you're not also looking at brain function. Okay. Okay. The last part of the talk, I want to talk to you about interventions that may potentially ameliorate language decline in healthy aging. And given how much time I've been talking about fitness levels, I'm sure it's no surprise to you that the first intervention I'll talk about will be an exercise intervention, right? So I'm about to show you some results of the FAB project. It's a fitness aging bilingualism project. A very large scale project with older adults who went through a home-based exercise intervention. And our monolingual participants measured in the UK, they underwent a whole multiple testing, many testing days pre and post intervention, where we measured different aspects of their language function, cognitive function, a whole set of brain imaging measures, and of course, physical function. Then home-based exercise intervention, and then all measures. And so we ran this study both in the UK with monolingual participants and then in bilingual participants. But I'm showing you the results of the monolingual participants only today because we only have so much time, and also because only our monolingual participants have brain imaging results. This was a home-based exercise intervention, which is a little bit different from the way people usually run exercise interventions. Our older adults just did this at home. They didn't need any special equipment. We asked them to do 3 sessions a week, 2 interval sessions and 1 circuit session. Of course, adapted to be suitable to people of this age range, right? So if you look at these exercises, hopefully you're all thinking, well, that would be extremely easy to do, but this is for older adults. And so the interval sessions, this isn't maybe the same as what you immediately think of when you think of HIIT training. So this is fast walking, uphill walking, or jogging, depending on the abilities of the people, where you're trying to target people to go to 80% of their maximal heart rate. And so this is a home-based intervention. So we didn't have control over what people were doing, but of course we were measuring watches, and we looked at the heart rate data, checked in with them, they had logbooks. So with these kinds of studies, people always want to know this basic information. Of course, participants didn't differ from each other, groups didn't differ from each other at the start in terms of lots of relevant metrics such as age, education level, how active they were at the start of the intervention. The intervention, maybe another thing worth mentioning is that the intervention had very low dropout rates. So these kinds of studies, they usually, like, adherence is a thing, adherence during the intervention, right? So people decide that they really don't want to be doing this with you anymore. So we had very low dropouts, really good adherence during the study, and also really happy participants at the end of the study. So we compromised maybe on the amount of control we had, and we did it differently from the way exercise physiologists usually run these interventions. But we had very happy participants with this home-based intervention. And from a physical perspective, it worked. So people in the exercise group, they got fitter, and people in the control group didn't. That's exactly what you want, right, from an exercise intervention. Also, if you look at basic physical measures like hand grips, getting up from a chair, the times up and go test, balance, the exercise group gets better, the control group doesn't. So it's a home-based intervention, but it works. All's great. And then people report things like, oh, I'm feeling more alert, I'm happy to take on the day better. And that's great, right? And then academics translate that to measuring attention and executive function and processing speed. And of course, we measure those things as well, but sometimes I like giving a voice to the participants instead, because it somehow seems relevant once in a while to do that as well. So participants say nice, positive things. So it made me mentally and physically feel more positive. So it's you get very happy participants. There's nothing more rewarding than doing aging research and doing logistically complex exercise intervention studies with older adults. So you get very happy participants, and in addition to benefits for their physical function, if you look at commonly used metrics such as quality of life, there's improvement. So all of those things still work if you do a home-based. Now, what we're interested in is, of course, language function. Is language function improving when you run interventions like this? And that's the new part, right? Because people have run exercise interventions before and looked at other aspects of cognitive function, like memory and processing speed, but no one had ever looked at language function before. So that's the new thing that we contributed. And so what I'm showing you is the results of the listening comprehension, the spatula task. And yes, thankfully it works. So if you look at the exercise group versus the control group, you see that the exercise group gains in reaction times and the control group doesn't. And the degree of the gain is related to the degree of benefit in their cardiovascular fitness. So this effect is mediated by people's fitness gains. We can attribute these benefits to the fitness gains that they get from the exercise intervention. So here you see a causal relationship between fitness and language function, as opposed to just a cross-sectional relationship that I was showing you before. Now, of course, the next step is what are the brain health mechanisms that underlie this? And so we, of course, have imaging data, not for this task, but for a tip-of-the-tongue task. But Jason is going to have to invite me or Janina again in a year or so, because Janina is currently working. So that's for next time, and I can tell you about the brain. Okay, so zooming out a little bit before I stop. Yeah, I have to stop talking. Zooming out a little bit before I stop talking. So not everyone can participate or wants to participate in exercise. So we have looked at other types of interventions. We tried cognitive interventions. There's lots of brain training apps out there. Older adults love brain training apps. They love participating in those experiments. So we tried, and I would say it failed. These cognitive interventions, they show benefits. You see practice effects, but they don't really translate to tasks that are somewhat or further related than the actual tasks that you're training. But that's what you want, right? So you want to be trained on something, and then you want the benefits to generalize to different tasks and different situations. And that is not what we find in R. So personally, I don't think that is the way forward. However, it seems that you have to train very specifically, and we are interested in language function. So why not train language function specifically, right? So that's what we're working on at the moment. So we're basically working on language training interventions, where with an app that we've built, we're going to try and see if we can increase syntactic variability, increase syntactic complexity in the language that older adults use through training in an app, and then, trying to measure that in tasks that are like not exactly related, but like a bit further related, like more free language production, and see if that works. It's a work in progress, but maybe in like 2 or 3 years' time when I come back. So, the exercise interventions, I think, are the most promising because they have such wide benefits, right? But so far, all we've demonstrated is that these exercise interventions work for language in very healthy, highly educated, groups of older adults. We haven't shown how this works in the older olds, people with lower education levels, people with lower socioeconomic status, more vulnerable older adults. Something that we've started working on is we're working with St. Andrew's Healthcare. They have residential care homes in Birmingham, and we're going to hopefully start in Northampton as well to see if we can implement exercise interventions there. Like, how would we do that, and what kind of benefits do we see with a population like that? But we're a long way and many funding applications away from being able to implement that in a larger scale with different types of adults. But we've partnered with HL2C and we're applying for funding. And okay, I know I have to stop talking, so I will stop talking. Some very general conclusions. Language skills change with age, with healthy aging. You see decline in many in production as well as in comprehension. But there's a large degree of individual variability, which seems to be determining things even more than chronological age does. And lifestyle factors play a big part in that. I've talked mostly about fitness. It alters brain function mechanisms that observe the language skills, and exercise interventions seem to be a promising way to meet. And thank you for listening, and thank you for all the amazing people that helped.
So we have time for